New York, the city of dreams and relentless pressure. On the 32nd floor of a towering skyscraper, the Silverstone Capitol office glows against the night sky, where young professionals relentlessly chase success. But for Emily Tran, this is more than just a job, Stuam. It's a daily battle. Emily sat in front of her computer screen, the cold, white office lights reflecting off her pale face. Numbers danced across the monitor, but only one thought filled her mind. Will I get scolded today? She took a sip of coffee, the bitterness spreading through her mouth but doing little to keep her awake. For the past 6 months, she had done everything she could to keep up with Silverstone's breakneck pace, but it never seemed to be enough. A deep voice suddenly spoke behind her, making her jolt. Emily, where's last night's report? Don't tell me you haven't sent it. David Miller, her team leader, spoke with a coldness as sharp as a knife. Her heart pounded. She turned in her chair, trying to stay calm. I sent it at 11 p.m. You can check your email. David stared at her for a moment before opening his laptop. Silence stretched between them before he smirked, his gaze laced with sarcasm. You did send it, but the numbers are wrong. Do you think our clients will accept such a sloppy analysis? Emily's throat tightened. She was sure she had checked everything carefully, but she knew well enough that no matter what she said, David would never admit that mistakes could come from anyone other than his subordinates. I'll fix it right away, she murmured. Do it now, and next time, if there's another mistake, don't say I didn't warn you. David turned and walked away, leaving behind a suffocating tension. Across the room, Samantha White, a senior colleague who never missed a chance to undermine her, crossed her arms and smirked. Thought you were competent? Turns out you're just average. Emily gripped her mouse tightly, frustration and disappointment boiling inside her. She had worked so hard, yet in their eyes she was never good enough. Silverstone Capital's cafeteria was on a high floor, with large glass windows overlooking Central Park. A luxurious space, but invisible social divisions lingered between different groups of employees. Emily stepped in, tray in hand, feeling the weight of isolation. Everyone had their own circle, laughing and chatting, but she belonged nowhere. Scanning the room, she spotted Jake Thompson, the rare colleague who was actually kind to her, sitting alone. After a moment's hesitation, she approached. Is this seat taken? She asked. Jake looked up and smiled. Of course not. They had barely started eating when a mocking voice cut through the air behind them. Got scolded in front of the whole office for a messed up report. Yet you still have the appetite for lunch? Samantha smirked, her voice dripping with malice. Laughter erupted from her table. Heat crept up Emily's face. She didn't want to react, but humiliation wrapped around her like a vice. Jake glanced at her, sympathy in his eyes, but he said nothing. In this place, no one wanted to be Samantha's next target. The clock struck 10 p.m. The office was nearly empty, with only a few employees still glued to their screens. Emily remained at her desk, her eyes burning from exhaustion, but she couldn't leave until she finished the revised report. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled, but they felt distant against the crushing weight in her chest. She reached for her coffee, only to find it had gone cold long ago. Leaning back in her chair, she felt the fatigue seep into every cell of her body. A notification pinged on her phone. She unlocked it to see a message from her mother back in Vietnam. Mom, my love, don't overwork yourself. I believe in you. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the screen. She clenched her phone tightly, determination burning in her heart. If this was a game of power, she wouldn't let herself be the loser. At first, Emily tried to convince herself that everything was just a misunderstanding. She believed that her colleagues were distant simply because they weren't familiar with her yet, or because she wasn't good enough. So, she worked even harder. She spent hours after work studying materials, trying to teach herself, and completing tasks without relying on anyone's support. When she encountered difficulties, she asked her colleagues for help, but their responses were often vague, indifferent, or dismissive. Meetings became a major challenge. Whenever Emily spoke up, the room would fall into an awkward silence. No one directly rejected her ideas, but no one acknowledged them either. Then a male colleague would rephrase her idea slightly differently, and James would nod approvingly. Gradually, Emily realized that no matter how much effort she put in, nothing changed. She wasn't ignored because she wasn't good enough. She was ignored because they refused to recognize her. Emily only felt slightly sad and uncomfortable, But over time, that feeling turned into a constant unease. She began noticing the small details. Messages in the workgroup chat often went unanswered when she was the one asking questions. But if another colleague asked the same thing, they would receive an immediate response. Every time she entered the break room, conversations among her colleagues would suddenly fall silent or shift to another topic. When the team had after-work gatherings, she was often left out. Or if she was invited, the invitation felt reluctant. Emily gradually felt like a ghost in the office, present yet unseen. James never openly criticized Emily. He didn't yell or publicly humiliate her. But the way he treated her inflicted a deep, silent wound. He often assigned her difficult tasks without giving clear instructions. When she asked for clarification, he would respond vaguely. "I think you can figure out the best way yourself. I want to see more initiative from you." If she completed the task on time, he wouldn't acknowledge her effort. But if there was any mistake, he would immediately criticize her for being uncreative or not decisive enough. Whenever an issue arose in a project, Emily was often the first to be blamed, even if she wasn't the main cause. Gradually, she started to feel anxious every time she received an email or message from James. Just seeing his name on her screen made her heart race and her palms go cold. One day, as Emily walked past the meeting room, she accidentally heard her name. She stopped. Through the slightly open door, she saw James and some colleagues chatting. "Emily? She's slowing everything down, isn't she?" A voice spoke, laced with mockery. James laughed. "Yeah, but she probably doesn't even realize it." Laughter filled the room. No one defended her. No one disagreed with that statement. Something inside Emily shattered. She had always believed that if she worked harder, if she did better, people would accept her. But at that moment, she realized that the problem wasn't her. It was this environment, a place where she had never truly been acknowledged, no matter how much effort she put in. Her chest tightened. Her heart ached. But above all, she felt empty. Silently, she turned away and walked slowly back to her desk. Her hands trembled slightly. She stared at her computer screen but couldn't focus anymore. From that moment on, she knew she couldn't ignore this any longer. If James had previously ignored Emily with cold indifference, he now openly belittled her in front of the entire team. During a team meeting, Emily was presenting a report she had spent hours preparing when James abruptly cut her off. "Emily, I have no idea what you're trying to say. This analysis lacks depth. Did you even put real effort into this?" The conference room fell silent. Glances were exchanged, subtle but sharp. A burning wave of humiliation spread through Emily's body, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I carefully checked the data and made sure that—" "Enough," James shook his head, his voice filled with disappointment. "I need someone with sharp thinking, not someone who just goes through the motions." A quiet chuckle rose from the corner of the room. Emily felt her throat tighten. For the first time, she felt real fear. James didn't stop at public humiliation. He introduced a new tactic, last-minute assignments with impossible deadlines. At 10 p.m., Emily's phone buzzed. A new email from James lit up her screen. Subject, urgent report needed. "Emily, I need you to revise the report with a more detailed analysis. Deadline, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Do it right this time." She stared at the screen, exhaustion and despair crashing over her. Could she ignore the email? No. If she didn't complete the task, James would humiliate her in front of everyone the next morning. Sighing, she opened her laptop, her eyes stinging from exhaustion. This wasn't the first time. Lately, James had developed a habit of sending late-night emails, expecting immediate responses. He stole her evenings, her sleep, her peace of mind. Now, every time her phone vibrated, her heart clenched in fear. Soon, whispers started circulating around the office. She only got hired because of the diversity policy. Emily heard it in the hallways, the break room, the hushed conversations that went silent when she walked past. The looks, the smirks. Colleagues who once exchanged small talk with her now kept their distance. Conversations would die the moment she entered a room. Some avoided her gaze, pretending to be absorbed in their screens. Even a coworker who used to have lunch with her suddenly said, "Sorry, I have other plans today." Day by day, the isolation grew heavier. After yet another long day, Emily sat in front of her mirror, staring at her own tired reflection. She used to be confident, passionate about her work. But now, every morning felt like stepping into battle. She started questioning herself. Am I really not good enough? Do I even deserve to be here? Were they right all along? Am I just lucky to have gotten this job? Those thoughts tormented her every night. She wanted to fight back. She wanted to stand up for herself. But how do you fight when the entire environment is against you? She felt like she was slowly losing herself. Every morning, Emily woke up with a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She stared at the alarm clock, her hand trembling as she shut it off. Instead of getting up immediately like she used to, she lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, unwilling to move. Another day at work. Just thinking about facing James and her colleagues made her stomach tighten. In the past few weeks, stepping out of the house had become a mental battle. On her way to the office, she watched people rushing to work. They all looked busy, but none of them carried the same fear in their eyes as she did. Was she the only weak one? Swiping her access card at the entrance, she felt like she was locking herself inside an invisible cage. Emily hadn't had a proper night's sleep in weeks. Every night she tried to close her eyes, but her mind refused to rest. James's words, her colleagues' glances, the tense meetings, they all replayed endlessly in her head like a never-ending film. Some nights, she woke up gasping for air, her heart racing, drenched in cold sweat. She didn't understand why she felt so panicked, but the fear was suffocating. Looking in the mirror each morning, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Deep circles under her eyes, pale skin, a hollow expression. Who have I become? Every time her phone buzzed with a new email notification, Emily's heart pounded. She dreaded opening her inbox, fearing that James had sent another impossible task in the middle of the night. Even when no messages came, she couldn't stop worrying. She checked her email constantly as if bracing for the next attack. At the office, she no longer spoke up in meetings. She had once tried to contribute, but now she had learned to stay silent. Any opinion she voiced was either dismissed or mocked. She had started shrinking into herself, hoping that if she stayed invisible, they would leave her alone. But they didn't. One day, James called her into a private meeting room. He greeted her with a fake smile, his tone unusually gentle, but his eyes were ice cold. Emily, I think we need to talk. She swallowed hard, anxiety spiking in her chest. James leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I know you're feeling pressured, but you have to understand this company is for people who can handle a high-performance environment. He paused, studying her as if carefully choosing his next words. To be honest, I'm not sure you're the right fit for our company culture. The words hit her like a knife to the chest. She had worked so hard, but now James was telling her she didn't belong here. She wanted to argue, to say she was capable, that she had given it her all. But a voice in her head whispered, if I were truly good, why would they treat me like this? James watched her reaction, then leaned forward slightly, his tone softening, but there was an unmistakable threat beneath it. This company doesn't hold on to people. If you feel like you don't fit in, maybe it's time to reconsider your future here. Emily understood. This wasn't a termination. This was a warning. He wanted her to quit on her own. She walked out of the meeting room, her mind blank. Returning to her desk, she tried to focus, but the numbers on the screen blurred before her eyes. Around her, colleagues laughed and chatted, but their voices sounded distant. She knew she had only two choices. One, endure it, ignore the toxicity, push through the pain, and try to toughen up. But how much longer could she survive before she broke completely? Two, fight back, stand up for herself, find a way to protect her dignity. But was she strong enough to do it? Would anyone support her? Her palms were sweaty as she stared at her computer screen. What do I do now? She knew that no matter what she chose, nothing would ever be the same again. As Emily left James's office, she knew she couldn't go on like this. If she kept enduring, she would break. She would lose all confidence in herself. And worse, she might start believing she was as incompetent as they made her feel. I have to do something. I can't let them trample over me like this. Determined, she decided to approach human resources. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the HR office. This was her chance to seek justice. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as she sat across from the HR representative, a middle-aged woman with a polite smile but cold, detached eyes. Emily laid it all out. James's baseless criticisms, the unreasonable late-night assignments, the rumors spreading among colleagues. She hoped HR would intervene fairly, but the response left her stunned. This is how the company operates. The culture here is demanding, but everyone has to adapt. If you feel it's not a good fit, perhaps you should reconsider your position. Emily stared in disbelief. You mean, I just have to accept this? The HR woman smiled as if she were soothing a child complaining about homework. I'd suggest trying to integrate better. James is very experienced. If he's tough on you, maybe it's because he sees potential in you. Emily clenched her fists. She had placed too much faith in their support. The truth was, they didn't care. She walked out of the office, feeling a chilling realization settle over her. No one is going to help me. If I want justice, I have to claim it myself. After the HR meeting, Emily knew she couldn't act on emotions. If she wanted to fight back, she needed proof. From that day on, she documented everything. Emails from James with absurd late-night demands. Curt, unwarranted messages filled with baseless criticisms. She started recording meetings, capturing every instance of James publicly humiliating her. Each time James crossed the line, she simply nodded, staying composed while mentally filing away every incident. She learned to hide her emotions, not to react, not to show weakness. I won't be defeated. The truth will speak for itself. But even with her newfound resolve, every day was a struggle. She felt like she was walking a tightrope, pretending everything was fine, while inside, she was counting down to the moment she would strike back. After weeks of gathering evidence, Emily finally reached out to a labor law attorney. Stepping into the law office, she felt nervous but resolute. Lisa Carter, an experienced attorney specializing in workplace harassment and bullying cases, greeted her. Throughout Emily's account, Lisa listened attentively, taking notes without interrupting. When Emily finished, Lisa leaned back, hands clasped together. You have strong evidence. With what you've gathered, we have a solid case against the company. Emily's heart pounded. Really? Lisa nodded firmly. The late-night work emails, the public humiliation, and especially the HR conversation. All of it proves not only that James was abusive, but that the company ignored and enabled his behavior. I think we have a strong case. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. But Lisa continued, her tone serious. But you need to be prepared. If we move forward, the company won't take this lightly. They may try to discredit you. They may even attempt to intimidate you. Are you ready for that? Emily tightened her grip on her hands. She had lived in fear long enough. She wasn't going to run anymore. Lifting her head, she met Lisa's gaze with determination. I'm ready. A few days after meeting with her lawyer, Emily sat in front of her computer screen, heart pounding as she prepared to hit send on her complaint. In the formal letter to the company's board of directors, she listed all of James's wrongful actions in attached evidence. Emails with unreasonable late-night work demands. Recordings of meetings where James publicly humiliated her. Internal messages from colleagues revealing the malicious rumors being spread. This complaint was more than just an accusation, it was a declaration. She would remain silent no longer. As her finger pressed send, she felt as if she had crossed a boundary. There was no turning back. I'm ready to fight. News of Emily's complaint spread rapidly throughout the office. At first, many were skeptical. Some were fearful and hesitant to comment. But then something unexpected happened. An anonymous email was sent to all employees. In it, someone confessed they had also been a victim of James. James didn't just bully Emily, I was also humiliated in meetings, assigned unreasonable late-night tasks, and made to feel worthless. But I was too afraid to speak up. Now I refuse to stay silent any longer. After that email, more testimonies followed. Some dared to sign their names openly, while others remained anonymous. Eventually, management could no longer ignore the growing outrage. A week after Emily filed her complaint, the company announced an internal investigation. James was suspended during the process. At this moment, Emily felt two conflicting emotions. On one hand, she was nervous about what the outcome would be. On the other, she felt relief. At least she was no longer alone. During the investigation, Emily was called in to testify. The panel of investigators listened to her evidence, reviewed the emails and recordings. Sitting before them, Emily was no longer the timid, fearful employee she once was. She spoke clearly and firmly, ensuring no one could dismiss her story. James used his power to manipulate employees, making us feel worthless and afraid. This is not workplace culture. This is abuse. When the investigation concluded, the company reached a decision. James had seriously violated the company's ethical policies and had engaged in workplace bullying. He was to be immediately terminated. The news sent shockwaves through the office. Some of Emily's colleagues rejoiced. Finally, the manipulator was facing consequences. Others were in disbelief. They never imagined that an ordinary employee like Emily could take down someone as powerful as James. On his last day, as James walked out of the company, no one saw him off. Emily watched from a distance, seeing the man who had made her life miserable. Yet she felt neither satisfaction nor pity. She only felt freedom. A few days later, Emily received an email from a former colleague. "Thank you. If it weren't for you, none of us would have dared to stand up. You didn't just win justice for yourself, you won it for so many others." Reading those words, Emily felt overwhelming pride. This fight was no longer just her own. It had inspired others to speak up. She knew that somewhere there were still people like her, people enduring injustice. But now she also knew this. No one can silence a voice that is strong enough to be heard. With James fired and company policies changing, many expected Emily to stay. She had fought. She had won justice. Shouldn't she stay and enjoy the results? But Emily knew that justice didn't mean healing. The painful memories of the bullying still lingered. She couldn't erase the sleepless nights of anxiety, the mornings filled with dread, or the meetings that had left her speechless from humiliation. Silverstone Capital had changed, but for her, it would always be a scar. One early morning, she placed her resignation letter on the HR director's desk. Not because she lost, but because she had won in her own way by choosing something better for herself. On her last day, Emily walked through the familiar hallways. The faces that once ignored her, that once hesitated to speak to her, now looked at her with respect. Some colleagues came to say goodbye. A few whispered, "Thank you. Because of you, I found the courage to speak up." She smiled. Before leaving, Emily glanced at the office building one last time. This was where she had felt despair and fear, but it was also where she had learned to stand up. She took a deep breath, then turned and walked away. Not as an escape, but as a step forward. After leaving Silverstone Capital, Emily took time to heal. She found a new job in a workplace that respected its employees. This time, she didn't just survive, she thrived, confidently voicing her opinions without fear of judgment. But more importantly, her story spread. An article about her case became a hot topic on workplace discussion forums. She received messages from strangers. "Your story gave me the courage to leave a toxic workplace. I used to think I had no voice, but now I know I'm not alone." Emily realized that her fight wasn't just for herself. It had become a beacon of hope for others. She had proven one thing: no one deserves to be bullied. And if you dare to speak up, you can change not just your life, but inspire others to do the same. On a bright new morning, stepping into her new workplace with confidence, Emily knew she had truly emerged from the darkness.